I didn't intend to eavesdrop when my son told his wife that I no longer fit into their lives. I was simply walking down the hallway of my own home to put the kettle on. Emily was standing by the kitchen island, the very one I had personally chosen 15 years ago when the house was being built. Her voice sounded calm, almost lazy. She doesn't notice anything anyway. She just sits in her room. Sometimes it feels like she's already living in a world of her own. Mark, my son, quietly smirked without looking up from his laptop. Well, let her. As long as she doesn't get in the way. I stopped. Not because it hurt, but because suddenly, everything became crystal clear. I was holding a mug of hot tea in my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt not resentment, but absolute calm. I didn't enter the kitchen. I quietly turned around and walked back to the bedroom, the very room where I had lived for over 20 years with my late husband. I closed the door, and I sat in the armchair by the window. The room smelled of jasmine, old wood, and my books. It didn't smell foreign, but I was already a stranger. They had moved in 2 years ago. At first, temporarily. Until we save up, Mark had said. I cooked. I paid the bills. I helped with their daughter, my granddaughter Lily. Then gradually, I faded away. My belongings vanished from the living room. My habits became strange. My presence became inconvenient. I became background noise. Quiet, useful, but redundant. I took a sip of the cooling tea and realized one simple thing. It was time to leave. The next day, I started small. I stopped cooking for them. In the morning, I made breakfast only for myself. An omelet, toast, and coffee. When Emily walked into the kitchen, she stopped. What about us? She asked, opening the fridge. There are groceries in there, I replied calmly. You'll manage. She looked at me as if expecting me to jump up and apologize, but I simply sat down at the table and began to eat. In that moment, something shifted. Not in them. In me. That evening, I opened my banking app. The card I had given Mark for emergencies had been paying for restaurants, clothes, and trips over the last few months. I deactivated it. Without warning. Without explanation. The next day, a text arrived. Mom, the card isn't working. Is this a mistake? I replied with a single word, no, and turned off the sound. By the end of the week, the tension in the house was palpable. But I was no longer absorbing it. I was living my own life. And on Thursday, the final straw occurred. I walked into the living room and saw a bare wall. The photographs were gone. My husband. My parents. Our family pictures. All of them. In their place hung cold, generic artwork. Where are the photos? I asked. I put them away, Emily replied. They were outdated. They didn't fit the interior. The interior. My home. I didn't argue. I simply went to the garage, found the box, retrieved the photographs, and carried them to my room. I placed my husband's photo on the nightstand, and I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for storage units. I was looking for buyers, people who buy houses quickly. No fuss. No unnecessary noise. 2 days later, an investor called me. We agreed to meet. I showed him around the house. He was impressed. Are you sure you want to sell quickly? He asked. Yes, I answered. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about freedom. We signed the contract right there in the kitchen. On that very island. In 1 month, the house would belong to new owners. I said nothing to anyone. I simply began packing my things. Quietly, neatly. Every day when they left for work, I didn't touch anything of theirs. Only my own. Books, clothes, memories. A week later, Mark asked, "Why is the fridge empty?" "Because you are adults," I replied. He was annoyed, but I offered no further explanations. I had nothing left to explain. I found an apartment. Bright. Quiet. Mine. I signed the lease, paid in advance, and for the first time in a long while I felt at home. When they were packing for vacation, Emily tossed out, "Keep an eye on the house. And don't forget to pay the gardener." I nodded. But I already knew it wouldn't happen. On the day of their departure, I called the movers. In a matter of hours, my life left that house. I walked through the empty rooms. I took nothing extra. Only myself. Before leaving, I left a note. "The house has been sold. You have 21 days after you return to move out. Mom." And the key. I didn't look back. 3 days later, the phone rang. "Have you lost your mind?" Mark shouted. "No," I replied calmly. "Where are we supposed to live?" "You'll figure it out," I said. "This is our house." "No," I answered. "This was my house." And I hung up. I blocked their numbers and went back to my book. 3 months later, my life had become quiet. Real. I walked in the park, baked cookies, read. One day, the doorbell rang. It was Lily. "Can I come in?" "Always," I said. We drank tea, laughed, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like an outsider, because I was no longer where I wasn't wanted. I chose myself. And that turned out to be enough. A few more weeks passed. I barely thought about Mark and Emily, not because I had forgotten, but because I was no longer living their life. Then one evening, as I was returning from a walk, an old acquaintance, Nora, called me. "Have you heard what's going on with them?" I stopped near my entrance. "No, they had a huge fight. Mark blames Emily, and she blames him. Word is they're barely making rent." I closed my eyes, not out of pain, out of understanding. Their life hadn't been built on love. It had been built on convenience. And that convenience was gone. "I see," I replied calmly, and went upstairs to my apartment. That evening, I sat by the window for a long time, watched the lights fade in the park, and thought about how strangely people are made. As long as you help them, they take it for granted. When the help stops, it feels like betrayal. But it's not betrayal. It's simply the end of an illusion. A month later, my life was disrupted again. This time, not quietly, harshly. I opened the door to find Mark standing there. He looked different. Older. Tired. Irritated. "We need to talk," he said. I silently stepped aside to let him in. He walked around the apartment, looking around. Light, space, silence. "You've set yourself up nicely," he said with a hint of bitterness. "Yes," I replied. He sat down, rubbed his face with his hands. "We're not managing." I said nothing. He waited. Just like before, when I used to be the one to offer help first. But now I remained silent. "We had to take out a loan," he continued. "Lily is stressed. Emily, we barely speak." "Pues, you could help," he finally said. There it was. Not an apology, not a realization. A request. Rather, an expectation. I looked at him calmly. "With what, exactly?" He frowned. "Well, money. Or maybe we could stay with you for a while." I slowly shook my head. "No." He jerked his head up. "What do you mean, no?" "It means no, Mark." He stood up. "Are you serious? We're your family." I stood up as well. But I didn't raise my voice. "I was your family when you were turning me into a convenience." He clenched his fists. "We were just living together." "No," I said. "You were living. I was serving." Silence. Heavy. Unpleasant. "You've changed," he said. "No," I replied. I returned to myself. He couldn't find anything to say. Stood there for another second, and left. Without slamming the door. Without shouting. He just left. And in that moment, I realized this was the real end, not the sale of the house. Not the move, but the end of that role. The role of a mother who sacrifices herself even when she isn't asked to, just used. A few more weeks passed. And one day, Lily came to visit again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Emily was with her. I opened the door. Emily looked different. Lacking her usual confidence. "May we?" she asked quietly. I nodded. We walked into the kitchen. Nobody spoke for a few minutes, until Emily finally said, "I was wrong." I didn't interrupt. She continued. "I thought that everything was supposed to be convenient. That's just how it should be. That you were simply obligated to help." She swallowed. "But when it was gone, I realized just how much you were doing, and how much we devalued it." I looked at her calmly, without anger, but without any desire to comfort her either. "And what do you want now?" I asked. She looked down. "Not help." That was unexpected. I just wanted to say that. Silence. "Real. Honest." "Thank you," I said. And that was enough. She didn't ask to come back. didn't ask for money, didn't ask for a solution. And for the first time, I saw an adult in her. When they left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching Lily laugh in the yard, and thinking about how strangely everything turns out. Sometimes, to save a relationship, you have to walk away. Completely. Without compromise. Without, let's try one more time. Because respect doesn't appear where it is begged for. It appears where it is demanded through actions. Another month went by. Mark didn't come by anymore, but one day, I received a short text message from an unknown number. I got a second job. We'll manage. Thank you for the lesson. I didn't reply, but I smiled. Because it wasn't an apology. It was understanding, and sometimes that is even more important. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, with a soft blanket, with a silence that no longer pressed down on me, but healed me. I looked at my hands, at the years I had lived, at everything I had given away, and at what I had finally kept for myself. If I used to think that love meant sacrifice, now I knew. Love without respect is just a habit of enduring, and I was no longer going to endure. I chose peace. I chose boundaries. I chose myself. And, as it turned out, it was the best decision of my entire life.